Hey, we're joined by Jamie Coutts. And first of all, thank you very, very much for taking some time out of your schedule to have this conversation around crisis leadership and the lessons that we've learned and you've learned in emergency services and helping people apply that to their corporate lives. So, Jamie, can you give the viewers maybe just a quick rundown of who is Jamie Coutts?
Oh, wow. Nothing quick about that.
That's good.
Um, yeah, I think a long-time firefighter, moved all the way up to fire chief, now in the private world. So, 28 years in the fire world and about 6 months so far in the private world and slam right into this pandemic in that role. So it's been interesting, I think when I think of myself anyways, I think of the fire side. And so being, in a private industry during something like this has been a new experience for me. I think back to the H1N1 and, you're the fire, back then it might have been the deputy fire chief and, all of that. And in 2011, when wildfire burnt the town down, you're at the helm. I'd only been on fire chief for a few months then. And so, you're trying to learn from that and everything that happened since then. And, just everything has train wreck right in the middle of town and Fort Mac in 2016 and high level 2019. I think more of myself as the fire side. So it's been really different to be part of a private business during this.
So you referred to the fire in 2011, and just for obviously, Jamie and I are really good friends, and we'll try not to swear throughout this entire interview. But
Oh, well.
fair enough. Can you explain a little bit more around the 2011 event that obviously changed the complexity or complexion of Slave Lake and the Jamie Coutts trajectory for sure? So can you help folks understand what happened there?
Yeah, I think that, in 2011, I'd been fire chief for maybe about a year, moving up to that May in 2011. And, a couple fires started around town and a couple more and a couple more. Before we knew it, there was 9 fires in the district that were running communities out, right? And so ours was one of those. And so we kind of evacuated from one area into town and then had to evacuate town out, get everybody out. And the fire slammed right into town. And so, for me, I think at that point, our fire department, it's a bit of an island. We're 125 kilometers away from the closest fire department, 160 kilometers away from the next one. And it's, we're just kind of doing our thing. It's a regional fire service and we're kind of doing our own thing. We had a plan. If wildfire comes a knocking, which it did, many, many times, we'd hit all the hydrants and spray water out into the bush and it would stop. Now, when you look back at that, you think, what a ridiculous plan. I can't believe that was the plan that held for, 49 years, but it was. And we tried it and fire blew right over top of us and into the town. From there it was, we were rocking plan A to Z all day long for about through 2 weeks for sure anyways.
So what was the first, let's call it first few hours of when that happened? So obviously, you go out of town and you're checking report of smoke, you've got your son with you, and then, that goes from 0 to 5 trillion in probably even an hour, right? And so
or less, yeah.
Yeah, even less. So what's going through your mind at that time from a leadership perspective? Because you've got Ryan out there, you've got a fire department, you've got this, multiple wildfires going on. Like what's going through your head for the first couple hours?
I think leading up to it, it was just another disaster. And I hate to say it like that, but I live in an area that's disaster prone. It's floods, it's fires, it's stuff all the time. And it's kind of relentless. I live in a place where you plan to have an emergency preparedness drill every year, but you almost don't have to because it happens in real time. And so I think this was, at the start, this was another wildfire coming. And we're used to this and we have hundreds of these fires start in the district. So, it was just kind of watch it, see what's happening, be ready, and kind of go from there. Then as it progressed, we had people in one area, and then another fire started on the opposite end of town, of course, how it always goes. And we send people out there, and it's kind of back and forth. I would say that the first, from 3:30 to 4:30, it was kind of a lot of planning. And I remember being at a briefing at the Emergency Operations Center saying, if nothing else changes, and I always start with that at every briefing I've ever done in my entire life, and I still do that to this day, because we can only be responsible for what we know, right? Better said, you don't know what you don't know, and that's just how it is. And so I always start those briefings with, if nothing else changes, this is what I know right now. And so I remember being in there and saying that. And while I was in there, the wind went from about 60 kilometers an hour to 120 kilometers an hour. And while I'm in there saying that, everything's changing.
And so then, because a lot of people have trouble navigating that change in tempo, right? And I think crisis is characterized by this slow simmering and then this exponential jump, right? So do you remember, like, how are you, was there a moment or multiple moments where you thought, okay, this is not like what we thought? We weren't planning for this, or we're not in Kansas anymore. Because I think a lot of leadership, you have that moment, right? It's like, shoot, this isn't what I was expecting. Do you remember when that happened, or how that transpired?
For the Slave Lake fire, I remember exactly. I was standing on 12th Street Southeast. I'd kind of gone to the corner with one of the firefighters, and I looked down the street, and I was calling in another truck, and there was another house on fire. And I said, "Hey, Ronnie, there's another house." And he kind of bent down and he looks down the street and he says, "Oh, don't worry about that one." And I grabbed him and I was like, "What are you talking about, man?" Like, and he's like, "Oh, that's my rental house, and those guys moved out yesterday, so there's nobody in." And then he just walked away and grabbed the hose and started. And I kind of stood on the corner and went, "What just happened here?" And I remember, and I don't know why I did this, but I counted 35 houses on fire on my corner. I'm standing there and I could see 35 house fires. And that was like, really, it hit me right there that, nothing will be the same again. Everything that we know, we don't know now. And, I think at that time we had around 60 firefighters. They're spread out all over the place. I'm just working on a truck. And it was like, you know what? We got to get a handle on this. We can't just be running around doing our best. We got to figure out what to do next.
And so then for me, a lot of times, every emergency I've ever been to, there's there's a very acute sense of overwhelm, no matter what that might be, like a tornado response, Katrina, whatever. And so would it be safe to say that was kind of your like, oh my, like your, oh shoot moment?
Yeah, I think from there, like, I would say that the next hour was just like that. Dispatch called and said, "I think we're going to lose power soon. We got 35 more calls. Do you want us to tell you what they are?" Like 35 calls in the queue. And I'm like, "No, I think I got it." I call him my good buddy from forestry, and I'm giving him a hard time about bombers and helicopters. And he's like, "Yeah, you know what? If we put those up, they're going to crash." And I'm like, "Yeah, I didn't think of that. It's too windy." And, he says to me, "Good luck." And I said, "Yeah, you too, man." And, so like all these little things just kind of start to turn into this unbelievable hour of things that when you look back now, each one of those should have scared me into statue mode, right? I should have just shut down completely. But really what happened instead was every time one of those things added on, we just went harder and faster. And really by the end of that hour, I would say the decisions were coming so fast that I was barely able to realize that I was making those decisions. And you just had to. Your brain just kind of took over, your training just took over, and you just start to do this.
So would it be safe to say at that point, you weren't feeling stress in the traditional sense, but looking back at it, did stress play a major role over the first couple hours, or is that something that you felt a little bit after that?
I would say that I was feeling some stress leading up to it. Once I got to that 35 house realization that it was different than everything we'd ever done before, and that this wasn't in any books, right? So there was nothing that I could have done or read or saw before that could help me out specifically for what we were doing at that time. And so really, I feel that it probably got less stressful. We maybe kicked more into survival mode, where your brain's going faster than you can even comprehend, and you're just kind of letting it roll. And the worse it got, we kind of had a saying, like, what else could go wrong? And so, 35 houses were on fire, 100 houses were on fire, 200 houses, 300 houses. It's this part of town, that part of town, it's jumping quadrants. And, at some point it's just like, okay, this is beyond anything that we've ever seen before. So let's just take a step back and start to make decisions that are good for the firefighters, good for the people in town, good for that, right? So it goes back to that safety, and it's I didn't really have to do it. My mind just did it, and said, go back to some training. So number one, take care of everyone's safety. Number two, make sure that everyone's evacuated. Number three, start putting out some fires, right? It was just your mind, thankfully, remembers a lot of the stuff that you see and hear and read, and really just kick that in high gear.
So when you talk to your firefighters, because you're doing a dual role, right? Like you're doing fire chief, but you're also engaged in the field too. So you've got that going on. But when you talk to the crews, how did they end up making decisions without you, essentially? Because, under crisis, and we'll talk about it, there's a requirement to create like a decentralized command, where you're pushing the decisions out into the field because there's just no time and there's no real rule book. So how did your crews start making decisions? Like they didn't look to you to say, hey, chief, should we go do this? Like, what were they thinking? What were they doing during all of this?
Yeah, I think that each fire truck kind of had its own crew, and each crew was kind of its own little incident command. They were operating in different parts of the town that they'd been sent to from the start. And it was kind of like hit a hydrant, grab some hoses, start putting out houses. And then it kind of turned into pull back to a safe place, grab some hoses, try and put out streets, pull back to, find some places where we can defend what's going on and let the rest burn for a while. And then, progresses all the way to, okay, more help's coming and lots of it. So what are we going to do between now and then when they come? Some critical times I can remember on the radio, I got on the radio and I just told everyone, like, if you have to leave the line to get your family out, to do something, to calm your wife down, to help your kids, whatever you have to do, then leave the line. There's no shame in that. If you can come back, try and come back. But if you got to go, you got to go. I mean, I deal with volunteer firefighters and, they don't have to stay and help. So we wanted to know that it was okay if they had to go help their families. There was another time where I was a couple guys on our crew. I walked over to the truck and they're just screaming at each other, top of their lungs, screaming at each other. And it was one of those, hey, you guys, what are you doing? Like, we're all we got. And so stop it. There's screaming's not going to help. Crying's not going to help. Like, we got each other and that's all we got. We had a little crew of 4. And, from there, it's kind of these 2 weird looks. And then it's the, I love you, man. Oh, I love you, man. And, the hugging and so it was really, weird communication, everything. I don't really remember the sound specifically, but 35 houses on fire makes a lot of racket. And so everything was at the top of your voice. So you're yelling everything and you're trying to hear stuff that you can't hear. And so communication, I would say in those first few hours was, it was really, every truck, do the best you can where you are. And that was really the last command that was ever given to them. Until later on, 3-4 hours later, we started sectoring and kind of got our incident command going again. And I think, it kind of has to happen that way, sadly, is, your officers and your top firefighters got to take over where they are. And then you get a big plan, and then you got to still get that out to the field. So you have that timeline, that lag where the good plan takes some time to get out to the field to everybody that's out there.
So if we were to compare this to, well, right now we're going through COVID, but this could be any crisis. One of the dangers or one of the things I see is, the reluctance to push decisions out into the field. And now we're starting to see a remote workforce, and that's causing, angst in itself in terms of, well, wait a second, I can't just call them into a boardroom and manage them anymore. They're sitting at home with, dress shirt and sweatpants now because they're working remotely. So kind of similarly to what you had. So what I heard you say is basically you give them an overall command, and then you're hoping, or not hoping, you're expecting them to carry it out based on what? Their training, rule, like standard operating guidelines, or what does that look like?
For sure. Well, it depends on the job, right? But I mean, if you sent them home to work remotely, you expect them to continue doing their job, whatever that job is, right? And so, I think that some people end up sitting around going, geez, I don't know what to do, right? I would go ask the boss if I couldn't think of the next thing to do. The next person is a go-getter, and they're doing all kinds of stuff. They're firing off emails and they're on the phone, and next thing you know, they're using all these different tools that are available to have meetings, whether they're in person like we're doing right now, or just on the phone, conferencing people in. And so it's really different, and it's person to person. This is really hard on people that need to be told every step of the way what to do. This is really hard on managers that like to tell everybody what to do every step of the way. And so, depending on who you are, if you don't need much direction and you've got a job that you can do from home, you're flying, you're going at it, you're doing great. The next person needs a lot of direction. They're not crushing it as well as that person, right? And I know, I see it on all kinds of social media every day that every different kind of leader leads a different way. And the ones that need a lot of contact and tell everybody what to do every second of every day, they're not loving this, right? Their leadership style is not conducive to having 16 different remote work sites and trying to go with, maybe some of their staff doesn't even know how to run a computer or, to call in on the conference line or do any of those things. And so,
knowing what you know about leadership and the experience that you have, what would you tell managers or leaders that do have remote workers? Because to your point, you've got high performers and you have low performers. If they were a high performer in the office, I would suggest they're probably going to be a high performer at home. If they were a low performer in the office, I'm not an expert, but I got to think they're going to be a low performer at home too. So like, how would you deal with that? Because again, in emergency services, it's kind of a misconception that it's all centralized, right? Like you've got one person making all the decisions, but an effective response, whether it be 2011 or anything, requires pushing that decision-making down. So what kind of advice would you give to like a frontline manager that this is new territory?
A couple of things. I would definitely say, make some decisions. Don't wait and wait and wait for things to happen, because every single person that's remotely waiting for you to give some direction, right? And so there's a lot of fear and worry in the world right now. And if you're not giving them any jobs or any information, then they're just worried. They're sitting around, they're worried. I'm not talking about busy work, but if there's things that people can do, get it out to them so that they can do it. Secondly, I would say is think about what you really need to get done, right? So depending on the type of business that you have or that you run, is there deadlines that you still need to meet? Will those deadlines matter in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month? Will they matter in 2 days? This thing is flying, and we don't know what's happening. The government's changing the rules every day as they learn new things. To me, I like what's happening because there's decisions are being made. Good, bad, indifferent decisions are being made, and we're getting them, and we're reacting to those, right?
And so what guidance would you have around decision making? And the reason I ask that is because there's a tendency in something like this to suffer from analysis paralysis. And I get the fact that you need to make decisions and you need to make good ones, but in emergency management, you almost become comfortable making a decision without all the information. And at least for me, when I have all the information, it's a red flag. Because to me, I'm like, hold on. If I think I know everything, then I am completely detached or unaware of something big that I don't know. So how do you do you have any rules of thumb or anything with regard to making decisions?
Yeah, I think that, look at the decisions that have to get made. Like I said, start at yes and work to no if you have to, instead of always starting at no, right?
Let's unpack that. What do you mean by that?
I think that there's a tendency in the world in general, and especially right now when it's a big emergency and everybody's panicking, to say no to everything, right? What if all these companies that are retooling their plants to build face shields and face masks would have just said no? But everybody go home. We can't help, so everybody go home. My favorite is the company that switched from making hockey equipment to making plastic face shields, right? That's somebody that said, yes, we can do something. I don't know what, but we can do something, right? So if you start at no, you put up a roadblock immediately that you are going to do nothing, that you're not going to change, that you can't do something. If you start at yes, I'm not saying that every time you have to say yes and you have to make it work out, because it just won't work that way. But if you start at yes and work to no, you'll have a lot more success, and you'll probably be a lot more helpful, and your people will probably be a lot happier to be with you than if you start at no every single time.
So from a leadership perspective, how can you ensure that your team starts with yes? And I suppose the first part would be outlaying that as an expectation. But then from a leadership perspective, how do you continue to make that happen? Because I think people, when they're scared, say no, right? And so unpack that a little bit from your experience. How do you, it's easy to say yes, but you're the leader. How do you make that happen?
For me, it's hard in a pandemic, because it's kind of a thing that you have to build your team into, right? Your team has to understand that you have an expectation that we're going to try and figure it out, right? That we're going to say yes, that I'll take it to something I know. So we'd get a lot of calls all the time to say, can we come to the fire hall? We want a tour of the fire hall. And I would always say, yes, like the public is our bosses. If they want to come see this place, somebody figure it out, somebody find a way. And so now during this pandemic, can you have people come visit the fire hall? Well, no, you can't. It's not safe. It's not allowed. So there's a lot of great fire departments out there that are just having a tour of the fire hall on Facebook, right? And so that's saying yes and meaning it, right? So, well, we want a tour. Yes, we'll figure it out for you. It might not be the traditional way. It might not be the way that you thought of it, but we'll find a way to make it work. If we just say, no, during the pandemic, we're isolated, you can't come, it's over, I don't want to talk about it, well, that's starting at no. If you start at yes, there's ways to figure it out. There's ways to, right? What if all the health workers just said, well, no, we can't do this. Right. We're not coming. The whole thing shuts down, right? And so.
And as a leader, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but you have to recognize that when you say yes first, the how may not end up being perfect, or how you might lay it down. Do you think that is that something for leaders to respect as well? That, it's going to happen and it may not be perfect, but it's going to happen. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, during this, just think of all the people the no people that started at no. I can't run this company from home. That person can't work from home. That person can't do this. And then here we are, there's hundreds of thousands of people working from home. They're making it work. They're figuring it out. They're trying to, right? It's like the first group of people that had to lay people off, right? That's sad. Nobody wants to do that. You know that means it's going to hurt your business, and it's your team. You don't want to let your team down. But then it's happening hundreds of thousands of times. Then it's happening millions of times. And it's not you, and it's not your fault, and you didn't do it. But you have to, as a leader, grasp that and say, okay, well, how can I keep some things going? How can I keep some people working? If I have to let them all go, when I bring them back, how does that look? What's going to happen? And so leadership is, it's really dependent on what you're doing and what your company's had to do to survive all this. But it doesn't just stop because everybody's gone, right? Yeah, you have to keep leading.
And so with regard to that, that's probably a good segue into something that you would have a particular perspective on. And that is, how do you look after people during, but more importantly, during crisis? And, in the case of Slave Lake, you're dealing with individuals that lost their homes, you're dealing with friends, you're dealing with all of these things. And so what kind of things did your team and your crews come up with in terms of stress and those sorts of things? And then that will lead us into a conversation of how you supported them through that. So what are some things that your crews experienced emotionally and mentally, both during the crisis and right after it?
I think you always have to remember that the people are the most important thing, right? Without the people, it doesn't move. Nothing moves, nothing happens, right? So for us, the firefighters that lost their houses, once they knew their families were safe, there's nothing else they can do, right? You're not going to rebuild your house overnight. You're not going to figure out your insurance overnight. And so they really just wanted to stay part of the team. They wanted to stay in the fight and try, and that's great, and we let that happen. And I think that, we protected them as best we can, not sending them into those neighborhoods, and really, starting and finishing every day with debriefs, having counselors available, breaking down all those stereotypes and just saying, hey, if you got to talk, you got to talk. How many people out there right now in their benefit packages have these emergency people that they can call, these counselors, and how many people are using that, right? We're kind of we'll tough it out society, and we don't really need to be. I tell people all the time, if you need to talk, talk, but I mean, I'm not a counselor. So if you need more than I can help you with, call the professionals. Now, are they getting overwhelmed? I don't know. But, the people are the most important thing. And even once we've had to lay them off, you have to stay in touch. You have to keep talking to them. You have to, how are you doing? And it's the simple things. Like you could say, well, how's the money situation? Well, you're laid off. We know how the money situation is, right? So they've put a bunch of things in there to try and help people with that. So, as the leader, what do? Give them those pointers, pay attention to that stuff, follow along, right? Did you defer your house payment? Did you defer your truck payments? Did you apply for EI? Is there something I can do to help you with that process? Here's the phone number to call. And it's not, we just don't cut it and quit and that's the end of it. As the leader, you have that responsibility to continue to lead even through those tough times. And that's hard because you're trying to lead your family, you're trying to lead other people, you're trying to help make sure their families are okay. You might have the bosses calling you to say, hey, we got this other stuff going on with the company. You're still trying to do stuff with less or figure out how you're going to restart again, if you're going to be able to restart again. And I get all of those stresses, but at the end of the day, when you're a company or when you're a leader, your people have to be the top priority.
And sometimes that means saying no or running interference with your bosses, right? Because they have a different list of deliverables and objectives and whatnot. And I think that in your career, without going into a ton of detail, but that was a big part of your job as a leader, is to run interference and protect the people that are working for you. Would you agree?
For sure, yeah. Like in my old fire chief job, that was like the number one priority, right? We're dealing with mostly volunteer firefighters. They have to be protected from everything at all costs. Not just the dangerous stuff, not just running into fires, but from the people that say not nice stuff on social media to the pressures that come from the budget or equipment purchases, or right. At the end of the day, they just want to come and help out. They don't want to have all that other pressure. Well, every leader at every company has the same sort of stuff. Some things you got to get help with and you can put to your people. Some things you can't, and you've got to take that on your shoulders. And that's tough. And so as the leader, you really got to protect yourself. You got to practice some, self-health and things like that. Are you talking to somebody, right? And I'm not just talking about going home and talking to your wife or your husband or whoever you got at home, if you have someone at home, if you're lucky enough to have that. But who else? In your peers, your friends, your coworkers, who else can you talk to? And this pandemic for me, you have to find those positive things. And a lot of those positive things are reaching out and talking to people that I don't get a chance to talk to every day, but checking on them, having them check on me, having phone calls back and forth that you don't always have. And that's all part of, being a good person.